So, as of April 7th, 2025, a new patch for Build 42 has arrived, and with it comes a host of new additions, a few balancing changes, and plenty of fixes. In this video, I'll be aiming to summarize the biggest parts of the update, giving you all of the important bits you'll want to know about without any of the fluff attached. There will of course be a little bit of speculation and some explanations as to how these changes might affect gameplay as well. If you want to give the patch notes a full read for yourself, there's a link down in the description. And without any more delays, let's jump into some of the new additions to kick things off in this update. Okay, so we're starting things off with clothing items, specifically armor. New spiked full motorcycle helmets and football shoulder pads have been added. These shoulder pads can also be divided into individual sides using a crafting recipe. New clothing items have been added to some zombie outfits as well, so make sure you're using blunt weapons to keep those clothing items intact if you want to wear them. Perhaps the largest implementation when it comes to clothing items, however, is that there are now several craftable clothing items that I definitely say are aimed at primitive survival situations. Things like animal skins, fabric strips, rags, and garbage bags can now be used to craft low-tier items that you'd probably wear if you were to find yourself, say, stranded on an island or deep in the wilderness. This includes items like new hide hats, robes, and wallets, as well as some twine shoes and a tarp chest rig carrying a limited number of items. There are now some new step van and van vehicles for tailoring businesses. Right now, the developers haven't defined the loot spawns for these vehicles, but they do make a note that the idea will be for them to serve as an opportunity to acquire items like large fabric rolls. There are now some new sounds for butchering actions and new animations when you are mixing fluids together with the fluid transfer system. Yet more flyers have been produced by that element of the design team, lootable in-game and directing you to some interesting locations to scavenge for loot. As for new additions to zombies, ones that have been knocked down or stunned now have additional chest movement, aimed at indicating to the player that they are still alive and pose an active threat if they aren't handled accordingly by a swift boot to the face. You will now have the option to right-click and drop any movable items like you previously could with generators. This is going to be a big help if you're looking to drop heavy items quickly in a sketchy situation with undead hot on your heels. For those that partake in roleplay servers, you may be interested to know that there are now craft recipes for blank ID cards, which burglars will know by default when starting their playthrough. The developers note that there's no mechanical purpose to these, it is purely an implementation for the RP servers out there. Now, if you're someone that prefers to play on a controller or has been utilizing split-screen co-op since the release of Build 42, you'll be glad to know that several new functionalities have been added in the farming department. I won't go through all of these, but you should find that you'll have a much easier time harvesting or watering crops, applying pesticides, and more. You can now craft gold and silver coins from the appropriate metal sheets, which could mean that we see actual currency usage when multiplayer comes around in the future, and we start to see some online servers go through months and potentially years of the apocalypse. Items consisting of iron and steel can now be smelted down into iron or steel chunks. I would imagine that the idea here is to allow more opportunities for players to fashion armor or weapons from items they find in the world by dismantling them. Now, for those that like to fight the undead in style, there's also now a recipe that allows you to shorten the length of sleeves on your character's shirt. And lastly, perhaps one of the most interesting implementations I've seen in this update, gasoline will now evaporate when kept in open containers. I would hazard an educated guess here that this is to prevent players from stockpiling gas in containers like rain collectors that would hold huge amounts of gas per constructed item. Alright, so that's all of the new additions you need to know about. We're on to balancing changes next. When tailoring, a number of recipes will now require scissors to actually be sharp when using them. If the item is dull, they won't allow crafting, so you'll need a whetstone handy. Fairly recently, the trait Artisan was added, giving the player levels in glassmaking and pottery. After this patch, you'll also know all currently learnable recipes for glassmaking when choosing this trait. Tin cans and small steel sheets can now be used to make improvised flashlights and lanterns to help survivors wandering around in the dark. Now, you've probably already noticed that raccoons were added in a fairly recent update. In this patch, you'll now be able to catch raccoons alive in traps. traps, making it much easier to either catch them and then place them in an animal zone of your own, or butcher them for meat and other resources. But of course, if I catch you doing that, we can't be friends anymore. Various rebalancing efforts have taken place for crafted weapons, such as a light nerf to short bats and reduced weight for a couple of hatchet and saw blade weapons. Now, this is perhaps one of the biggest balancing changes in these patch notes, so pay attention to this one if nothing else. Recipes for various blacksmithing tools, like metalworking punches, smithing hammerheads, tongs, and heading tools, have all been reduced from a requirement of skill level 4 down to skill level 1. This essentially means that anyone who has grinded out XP for level 1 blacksmithing will now be able to fashion the basic tools needed for further blacksmith crafting. Forging of nails has also been reduced from level 3 down to level 1 as well, which will make it much easier to manufacture an alternative item for building purposes if you're struggling to find that elusive box of nails. There's a few other crafting recipe balance changes in this update, but nothing that I feel will have a major impact, so I'm going to opt to skip past the rest of those and get onto the fixes in this update next. First on our list, propane tanks can now be removed from grills correctly, and on top of that, blow torches can now be refilled as intended. Now, in a recent update, zombies will now pile up against fences, causing damage to said fence before eventually breaking through. There's been a few fixes to do with this new feature, which should cause fences to break less quickly, as it was occurring a lot quicker than intended before this update. Wood axes will now break procedurally as they're supposed to, producing both an axe head and a broken handle, just like you'd expect from other similar axe items. For those of you that like to keep livestock and other animals for companionship, you'll be glad to know that they will no longer just wander through gates and doors when they are hungry, which should make keeping them in their pen much easier. There's also been some fixes to how animal zones behave inside of barn structures. Before this update, there were a couple of issues causing player crafted items to be thumpable through walls, which of course is not great if you're placing crafting stations or furniture close to the walls of your safe house. In this update, those issues have now been fixed and zombies should adhere to the rules of the corporeal plane. There's been a handful of fixes to things that cause errors when playing with a controller, as well as a fix to a bug that caused controller players to be unable to vault over low fences. A couple of fixes have been issued for bathtubs, which now ensure that the player can interact with them all, where previously there were some issues with a select few, and you should now be able to plumb a bathtub to a rain collector without any problems. Previous to this update, padlocks were non-functional, but with this new version, that problem has been corrected, and you should now be able to use them on items that would make sense to do so. Not really something you'll need to worry about right now, but it will have its uses in multiplayer games once that feature is enabled. Okay, so there is one fix in here that especially caught my eye, which reads as follows: fixed zombie vision radius using min value instead of max for the penalty. I'm not 100% sure what this is actually referring to, but I'm going to take a guess here that previously zombies were having their minimum sight radius reduced by things like fog instead of their max radius, so perhaps we'll be able to travel a bit more stealthily through fog and darkness from here on out. Once again though, this is just my interpretation of something that's been left a little bit ambiguous. Perhaps the best fix of all though that I've seen in these patch notes, and I will quote directly here: fixed raccoon skull on floor that was scaled for King Kong's island. Not that I've seen this myself, but I sort of wish that I had now. So that should just about wrap up everything you'll need to know from this update, but once again there is a link in the description to the full patch notes if you'd like to give them a look for yourself. I'd actually like to get your opinion on something before you go. Previously, I've been skipping out on covering smaller patches or updates with very little content in them, but then I've seen some other creators covering those same updates, and even though the videos are quite short, it seems like the community would still much rather watch a video than read the patch notes. So my question for you guys: would you prefer if I just covered all the updates from here, including those that would only really result in a video that's a few minutes long, or would you prefer I skip the small ones and make sure you get a nice chunky upload every week? Let me know in the comments of this one, and once again, thank you very much to all of my Patreon supporters for backing the channel for as little as £3 a month and gaining access to our whitelisted multiplayer server, currently on build 41, running fresh wipe cycles every month. Link in the description if you'd like to join them. Thanks everyone, and I will catch you all in the next one.